and anybody who comes through I'm going to kill. And they've done this a number of times. If I'm a friendly, I'm going to drive up this hill real slow and wave and make sure that they see me and they know that I'm a friendly and don't shoot. So it also gives you an indication, again, that the revolutionaries are unwilling to fight for Kobani again. They lost so much blood and so many fighters in that 1 or 2 month battle, and it was so bitter that they're doing everything that they can to control flow into and out of Kobani, especially through the areas that they control in Rojova. Next one. This is a mine. This mine was planted the night before I traveled this road. This is one of the reasons, one of the questions undoubtedly that somebody has in their mind is, how is the war going? And the answer is the war has won, and the good guys won, for once, right? It looks like Daesh has been pushed out of Rojava. There's still some mopping up operations, and the corridor between Efren and between Kobani needs to be sealed, needs to be opened. But other than that, pretty much there's very little type of military activity. Most of it is terror, and it's terror like this. So this is some Daesh fighter crawling over from the Turkish side of the border, planting a bomb, and then crawling back. And obviously not fixing the trigger right so that it blew up when nobody was over it. So, and then behind me, the road was severed by Turkish shelling. So my driver and I had to make this big U-turn all the way around to get to Kobani, which took us to this one. So this is the checkpoint right outside Kobani, and this is coming in from the east. That hill that you see is a hill that overlooks the city, and it's called Mishtanur Hill. And for those of you who remember the photos when the siege was lifted, there was a huge YPG yellow flag flying over Kobani at the very end, and that's when we knew they'd won. So, pretty important. And that's a little bit closer look. So this is a field that is mined by YPG, and then YPG and YPJ. Let me go through these real quick. YPG, Yakinin Palestina Gel, YPJ, Yakinin Palestina Jin, which is the Women's Self-Defense Forces, YPJ, and the People's Self-Defense Forces, the YPG. So there's so many acronyms. They're much worse than we are. So they've dug a trench all the way to the Turkish border, and then they've lifted up a berm to effectively seal Kobani off from infiltration by any type of armored column or armored carrier. And as I say, this goes about 4 or 5 miles to the Turkish border, so it's a pretty extensive fence, pretty impressive. And that says, welcome to Kobani in Kermanji. So when I was there, and I was there the last 2 weeks of October, so I was there almost to the day when the siege was turning in the revolutionaries' favor. So after a year, this is where the cleanup effort had gotten to. They were just in the process of being able to put fuel into these trucks to be able to carry stuff out from Kobani. So these big massive fields of rubble and destroyed buildings and things like that were starting to form outside of the city. In addition, these trucks were operating pretty much 24 hours a day, so this was constant, ongoing of these trucks dragging this stuff out. Cars were a different story. One of the things that, as I mentioned, one of the things that Daesh is doing is they're planting mines. And I rode out of the country with a couple of guys who worked for the Mines Advisory Group who were ex-British soldiers. And their job was to go in to defuse mines and then to take them apart. So they had been working in the Habur section. And the Habur section is right where I crossed, and there's a series of Christian villages there. Just real quickly, the Christian community in Syria is ancient, probably 300 years after Christ's death. It has its own culture, its own written language, its own spoken language. It truly is self-contained. And most of the Christian villages are primarily Christian villages because of the pogroms that have occurred over the course of the past 1,000 years or 1,800 years or whatever among that community. What has happened is when Daesh is leaving these Christian villages, they would put huge bombs underneath houses, huge mines underneath houses, and the triggers would be hooked to something like you'd open a cabinet, like in the kitchen, or you'd move a mattress, and that would trigger the bomb. And these bombs were 1,000, 2,000 pounds worth of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil, which, for those of us anarchists who enjoy explosives, is a real crappy explosive. But you put 1,000 pounds of it together, it's going to demolish a house, and that's exactly what happened. So they were going through and doing that. So when they were digging these cars out, they were making sure that there were no mines attached to them. And so it took them a while to get some of these cars moved out of the city. Downtown Kobani. This is looking up Misdemeanor Hill. It looks very different now. A friend of mine from the city sent me photos from their Newroz celebration. And a lot of the rubble and a lot of the buildings have actually been cleaned up, and so it looks very different. But that's pretty much the shape of it when I was there about a year after this had gone down. The next one, pretty much the same thing. That's right downtown Kobani. That shows you the level of it. This next one is interesting. So this was one building that was direct hit by an American American bomb. And you can see that the floors of the building had pancaked one on top of the other. Now, the revolutionaries were convinced that there were two or three families in this building when it was demolished, as well as a number of YPG fighters. So they didn't know it. They wanted to go in and do kind of a memorial, but they hadn't been able to get the folks together yet to begin pulling the bodies out, that type of thing. So they were leaving it for kind of the end. So. And when I was there, middle school was in session, but elementary school was open. Or no, elementary school was closed. So there were a lot of kids around doing kind of what kids do, regardless of the fact that it's in this city that's been effectively destroyed, throwing water at each other, tormenting their older brother and sister because they had to go to school. It's pretty typical. Russian tanks. These are light Russian tanks from the 60s and 70s. The way that they got to be here is they were given to the Assad regime, by the Russians during their Soviet period. Assad would have used them for a while. They would have sat in an arms depot for a while, and then when Daesh took over, they were used by Daesh as tanks. Now notice that there are no armor-piercing rounds showing on these tanks. That means that these tanks were destroyed in the old-fashioned way, which is a really hard, difficult way. So some YPG or YPJ militia person ran up, threw a grenade or a bomb into the half-track, severed the half-track on one side of the tank, making it effectively immovable, and then that would allow a YPG or YPJ team to get in and to kill the tank crew. That's a really difficult way to take out a piece of armor. Your tax dollars at work. So this is a Hummer, and this is from, I think, Gulf War II, likely. Given to Iraq, and then when the Iraqi arms depots were overrun by Daesh, it was used by Daesh and then subsequently destroyed by YPG. So this is right out in front of an old school that is now the YPJ headquarters in Kobani. And I actually made a good friend in one of the YPG commanders in Kobani, a guy named Rashad, who had a wicked sense of humor. And we were walking by this hulk one day, and I said, what are you gonna do about this? Because it's kind of in your front yard. You should be really, taking care of it. And he says, we're gonna leave it. We kind of like it. It's kind of a trophy, and we worked hard to put it there. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, in America, don't they have garden gnomes? I've heard about those. And I said, well, it's hardly a garden gnome. I said, but if you want to, a good fountain would help it. So he was rolling with it pretty good. I wanted to show the bitterness of the fighting. So this is just one simple detail from one of the standing buildings that were left in Kobani. So you can see that this wall is Swiss cheese as a result of light armor rounds. And the entire hole that we're looking in the wall there was probably caused by either artillery or a rocket-propelled grenade. So when you get into these buildings, you begin to realize that this fighting was not from block to block or building to building. This fighting was was from floor to floor or room to room in some cases. I mean, that's bitter fighting when you're looking somebody right in the face. So, what were they fighting for? This is a picture of the Shahid Kawasi, the Martyr Kawasi commune, which is located in Kobani, in Misdemeanor Hill. And these folks have gathered there today. The gentleman with his finger on the map is Mr. Shaiko, who was a pediatrician and now works for TEDDEM. And they're there today to talk a little bit about commune boundaries, because their commune is growing quite quickly as a result of people returning to Kobani. And TEDDEM wants them to realize you guys want to think about splitting up, and here's some ideas in terms of how that might look. The ideal commune, according to, or at least according to what they've discovered or what they've worked out so far, is between 50 and 100 families. It's an interesting number, isn't it? Right? We've heard that number before from the villages, right? This is where you begin to see where Abdul Öcalan, who's the ideologue of the PKK, shows some of his brilliance. In other words, a lot of the stuff, he uses Western terms to define concepts that are centuries, if not millennia old. So basically the commune is basically a village type of setting with communal living, that type of thing. It's just that here they've moved that village setting into an urban area. So there's something really wrong with this picture from northern Syria, and the more I look at it, the more I realize how wrong it is compared to what I saw there. What's wrong with this picture? What really doesn't look right for northern Syria in 2016 even? Anybody? There are men and women sitting in a room together. That's really unusual. I can't tell you how unusual that is. Because you walk into a home in northern Syria, there are 2 living rooms, one for men and one for women. And social space is extremely well defined for men and women in that area and with these cultures. So this in and of itself is a real interesting photo to begin to introduce the idea of kind of women's empowerment. I'm proud to say that one of the thinkers who I think we can identify as anarchists with, Charles Fourier, said in 1820, he says, the best way to judge a revolution is by the empowerment of the women who participate in it. Okay? And the Kurds have exactly that same mindset. So as an example, just to show where the communes are coming from, communes are required, for this decision to be valid, if they're going to make a decision today on anything, they have to have at least 40% women in the room. If there's not 40% women in the room, they might as well just pack up and go home and wait until they can put a meeting together that has 40% women. In addition, each one of these communes has a council, and the council is kind of an executive arm who meet every once in a while. The council will have 2 co-chairs, a male and a female. Of those 2, the female co-chair has the ability to stop the proceedings of the commune over anything for any reason she chooses, for any length period of time that she chooses. Okay, so the reason there, again, we hear from the left, and particularly kind of the Marxist leftists, well, what's happening in Rojava is about gender parity. And that's not what's happening there. What's happening there is a different condition, a different style of society is being brought into being, a different idea of society. And that society is matriarchal and not patriarchal, which is very interesting. Anything else about this photo? Oh, so in the US, in Western liberal democracies, the individual is the fundamental building block of political society, right? So as an individual, I'm supposed to vote every 2 to 4 years, I'm supposed to, pay my taxes, that type of thing. In Rojava, this is the most basic form of political organization. So if I have a beef with anything or anyone, I take it here first. And they help me, get the information that I need from resource committees, that type of thing. If they can't help me, then I go to somebody else. These folks are also going to appoint individuals into the legislature. Each one of the cantons has a legislature, and those legislators have very interesting roles because they do not exist to initiate legislation. Rather, they take what communes have done, make it legal, and then notify other communes what the previous communes have been up to. So their sole role is basically communicatory. They communicate to other communes, as well as to craft laws that allow communes to do what communes are doing anyway. And they cannot initiate legislation. In other words, a legislature can't say, oh, we want